All right, everybody, welcome back here. I am Mappamonte. This is Wyatt Darby. We just wrapped up Pioneer and Legacy here, so we're getting ready to jump into some modern action, which is arguably our most important format of all of them. Players have already played their rounds in those two formats, and now the cream's starting to rise to the top here. So a little bit more as we repair the pods based on the standings of players who've already kind of dusted off Pioneer Legacy, maybe had a little rough time, and they get to go to maybe a format they're more comfortable with Modern here.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just as diverse as our last two formats, actually. With a full 16 different archetypes represented, we're going to see a wide range of variety and, a fair amount of the stuff that's you kind of expect to see here, too. The first deck I like to talk about is a bit of a surprise. Infect. We actually had two players register that, and it's actually headlined by a few new cards from this year, Oko and Veil of Summer, slotting very naturally into that strategy.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy how Oko's just in every single deck. We looked and we're like, well, Oko here, Oko there, Oko kind of everywhere across the format. It's kind of getting hard to figure out where Oko's legal and not legal anymore, but it's definitely legal in Modern. And you mentioned a bunch of players playing it today. Infect, I agree, is a sleeper choice. Sometimes you kind of are attacking a certain meta with this kind of deck. I think it's just strong kind of in general, though.
Yeah, it's just a really good, fast, goldfishy kind of creature combo deck, If your opponent's not prepared with spot removal and there's not a ton of lightning bolts floating around right now, it can run you over. And especially you see a lot of decks leaning on the interaction coming from a cryptic command. And you might just be dead before you get to cast it, even, if you, say, play it on turn 3 off a Mox Opal.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Something else notable you mentioned is there's an exclusion of the Druid decks. Like, where were those? The Star City Players Championship last week had Team Lotus Box, who was probably one of the best deck innovators on the series all year long, played a bunch of Druid decks. And here at the Nerd Rage Championship, 0.
Yeah, it's kind of bizarre. But looking at the field, it seems like a lot of people did the play what you're comfortable with approach.
Sure.
And, Druid is a powerful deck. It's explosive, kind of similar to Infect in a lot of ways and what it preys on and what it struggles against. But, it has its flaws. It can be picked apart by spot removal. And we did see that Lotus Box had a great showing, but they did eventually falter to Urza, which was one of the matchups I think they were trying to target. So It's strong, but not infallible. And we're going to see it sideline all weekend.
Yeah, you mentioned something like that with the Druid decks where I think struggles against something like Burn or Lava Dart, things like that. So there is a Burn deck in our format, and there's also Prowess deck in the field as well, which I was really shocked to see Prowess of all things. Burn is one of those ones where it's kind of a fringe deck nowadays. I thought it matched up pretty well against like the Stoneforge Mystic decks, certainly against the Druid decks. If you thought Infect was going to get played, which I don't know that many people thought that would happen, those are great matchups for Burn across the board. So interesting to see that included.
Yeah, I think Burn's kind of the classic. It's a very workman-like archetype. You win some die rolls, play some turn 1 Goblin Guy, and you'll be feeling good. But, it's kind of a deck that's been walking on a treadmill a little bit in power level. A lot of modern decks have gotten a ton of new tools in the last year, and Burn's just kind of same old, same old. So I think it's functional. And, if you catch the right matchups, if your lightning bolts are good, and if you're playing Prowess, if your lava darts could be worth 2 creatures, I think you can be in a good position. So those are a little bit more maybe matchup dependent style decks, and we'll see exactly how that plays out today.
Yeah, the thing Burn kind of wants to dodge, you mentioned Oko's kind of everywhere. There's 2 Dredge decks, and there's also the Sultai Crabvine deck, so Creeping Chill is kind of a beating. If you think that Dredge is going to be omitted, that's another reason to play like one of these Burn or Prowess decks for sure. So let's talk about some specific archetypes here. I'm thinking about Sam Black's deck here. He mentioned on Twitter a couple hours before the deck lists were due, he was kind of crowdsourcing for opinions on some of his deck choices. He ended up going with the Sultai Urza deck, and he's playing 4 Archmage's Charm. So how do you feel about that card overall?
It's fantastic. His version has 2 big innovations, the 4 copies of Archmage's Charm functioning as the most powerful thing you can do with it, in my experience, is cast Urza, which is a good step 1 no matter what you're doing.
Yeah, that's true.
But being able to cast Urza and have a 3-mana counterspell available that same turn is it's so much easier to obtain that counterspell than Cryptic Command on your Urza turn, and it's got a lot of flexibility. If your opponent isn't presenting anything that you need to interact with right now, the draw 2 is certainly fine, digging you towards your Urzas and Okos, and there's a lot of just random things that are fantastic to steal. Death Shadow, Aether Vial, Champion of the Parish, all come to mind. Glistener Elf, Prowess creatures have all been things that I've done. And the other card that I love is Icefang Coatl.
Yeah.
Really excellent with the counter spells and opens up a lot of really nice Mystic Sanctuary kind of synergy plays where on 5 mana, you play a relevant spell, I'll fetch out that Sanctuary, coatl that card back to my hand, and Archmage's Charm counter your thing. I also have a great blocker out of the exchange too. So really synergistic, on that, a little bit more of a control play at slowing the game down. And yeah, I'm a huge fan of Sam's deck.
Yeah, you mentioned Icewing Coatl, and that's kind of just popped up everywhere in these Bant Snow decks and things like that. The Bant Snow deck also gets Stoneforge Mystic, which is one of the newer, at this point, additions to Modern. And it's kind of shaped the format in a way. I don't know if I assumed that Stoneforge Mystic would be everywhere. I think it's kind of just a reasonable power level, and it really makes these Bant Snow decks kind of tick.
Yeah, I look at it, it's approximately Termagoyf. And, Goyf's had better days. If you care about life linking, the card does gain a lot of value. But the format right now is, with Oko being everywhere, it's hard to invest too much in creatures and artifacts that kind of have to sit on the battlefield and not be interacted with too much to do their thing. And as good as Stoneforge is, as flexible as it is, it doesn't exactly stand up well to that type of interaction.
Yeah, I agree. We talked about a bunch of the decks that are in the format, as far as there's no Druid decks we talked about being omitted. There's also no Tron, and there's no Amulet Titan. That's kind of just really mind-boggling when I think a lot of people feel like Amulet, if the Urza decks are the best deck, then Amulet Titan's just right underneath that, essentially.
Yeah, Big Man has had a pretty good year, too. Amulet Titan picking up Castle Garenbrig has been huge. That deck has really been refined and sped up. And, yeah, that's kind of the one that I would look for as my go-to big mana deck. And we did see that it did show up a little bit last week, and I believe Matthew Dilks played it. There are some Amulet aficionados, but looks like we don't have anyone who kind of defaults to that. And, yeah, it's just it seems a bit too powerful for no one to play, so I'm genuinely surprised by that.
So we did notice a bunch of the Primeval Titan decks kind of popping up here in our format. There's some with Simeon's Spirit Guide, of all things, just kind of turbo, I would call them, turbo scape shift decks, basically, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, it's just very all in. My game plan is turn 3 Primeval Titan. Whether that's with Arboreal Grazer, Castle Garenbrig can fit that in, multiple ramp spells in the first 2 turns. Very linear deck, and what the Primeval Titan's doing is fetching Valakut sometimes, or Field of the Dead.
Sure.
Really big card that's been axed from a lot of formats, but not Modern. And what that does is it gives you the flexibility of, well, if my opponent's playing a small creature deck that I need to interact with, we'll get Valakut and make some lightning bolts. If they're playing one of the other popular decks in the field, Bant Control, I'll just start getting this kind of difficult to interact with, repeatable threat engine with this turn 3 Primeval Titan. The flexibility that it's gotten, huge, and I mean, the card's as good as it always was, I think.
Yeah, I think that you mentioning Field is one of the big upgrades this deck got in recent memory. Otherwise, you were kind of just, you mentioned a linear game plan. You're, all right, well, I'll go get all my Valakuts and hope to kill you eventually. Being able to have a long game is pretty nice for these decks. So thinking about these decks here, is there anything that really sticks out to you from these 24 players decks? Like, what would you play, or what's the best deck you think constructed here?
If I was playing this tournament, I think I would play almost exactly what Sam Black registered.
Okay.
I've been having a lot of success kind of grinding that one out in leagues on Magic Online, prepping for some Grand Prix early next year, and it might be bold, but I'm starting to believe that Urza doesn't actually have any bad matchups in
Sure.
Modern. The deck's just too powerful. Oko and counter spells give you too much flexibility, and especially in the hands of someone like Sam Black, I would not be surprised to see that one, win that final pot of the day.
Yeah, I think I really like the Infect decks. Now, you mentioned the 2 players. Matt Dow is one of them, and Evan Gascoigne is the other one. I think that attacks pretty well, especially against like Death Shadow, which I thought might be big. I really thought that Amulet Titan would see a big showing. I didn't expect much burn or prowess, so maybe they'll get tripped up there. So I think the Infect deck has a decent matchup against Urza. If you're able to attack with Glistener Elves without there being anything on the board, that's obviously huge. But it also has things like Blighted Agent, which once the board's gummed up, you're able to attack through. I think that's probably like a weird outlier. Those guys might be able to find within their pod. Hopefully they're able to find good matchups for them. And I think that's kind of a deck that's just hasn't seen a ton of play recently. And you mentioned the lack of lightning bolts. There's a Jund deck, but other than that, everyone's playing like Icewing Coatl as their spot removal, essentially. And Archmage's Charm, while it's pretty annoying, it's also 3 mana, and you could die way before then. So
yeah, relying on 3 mana cards to kill Infect is dangerous in a world of Vines of Vastwood and Blossoming Defense. So I think the deck absolutely has the raw power and speed to be capable of winning any particular game it's playing. And if you get good matchups on top of it, Infect is one of the decks with the best kind of polarized matchup spread in Modern. So yeah, if you can kind of win the matchup die roll, you just have to make sure your deck functions, and you'll be in great shape.
All right, with all that said, we're going to get out of here, and we're going to get the players ready to roll for some Modern action, and after that, we're going to crown a top 8, and we'll be back in just a few minutes.